Hey everyone, Chris here, and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about the books I read between December 14th and December 20th. First up is Murder at the Lakeside Library by Holly Danvers, and I gave this book 3.75 stars. This is the first book in a cozy mystery series, and in this series we're following Rain, who has returned to her family's lakeside cabin after the death of her husband. The cabin is the peaceful retreat that she's looking for, and comes with an informal library that her mom usually runs. As she's working to get it back up and running for the year, she ends up coming across the body of a real estate developer named Thornton on her family's property. Fingers then get pointed at Rain's mom, Willow, who is unusually absent from the lake this year, and there are all sorts of rumors about Willow's relationship with Thornton, including that they might have even been having an affair. Rain then starts to dig into things in the hope of clearing her mother's name. So I thought this was a good start to the series. I liked Rain as a character, and seeing her struggle with not having been at the lakeside in a while and getting to interact with people she hadn't seen in years. I liked seeing her struggle with this information about her mom and Thornton, because her absence from the lake meant she really had no idea how her mom knew this man. But she definitely didn't think her mom had anything to do with the man's death. So she really wanted to find out the truth about what was going on. I thought there were some very interesting twists and turns in this first book in the series, and I definitely plan to continue on with the series and see what kind of mysteries Rain has to solve in future books. Next up, I read The Gunkel by Stephen Rowley, and I gave this book 4.25 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt People on the Cover for Phase 10 Chooses My TBR, and Big City for Create Your Own Holiday Adventure Readathon. In this book, we're following Patrick, who is suddenly the caretaker of his 9 and 6-year-old niece and nephew after the death of their mother. Their mother was one of his closest friends, and their father is actually his brother, and their father is having to deal with some stuff that he didn't deal with while their mother was in the process of dying. So Patrick is now suddenly on his own with these two kids and has no idea how he's supposed to take care of them, because he hasn't really spent tons of time with kids in general, let alone these two particular kids. Patrick is also still grieving the loss of the love of his life, and feeling like he wasn't the best friend to their mother in her final days. Despite all of that, Patrick has to figure out how to take care of these kids and help them to deal with their grief and missing their dad, all while managing his own grief. And of course, not having a clue how to take care of kids. So I really enjoyed this book. I loved the balance that Stephen Rowley managed to get between showing how upset Patrick and the kids were in various ways, while also making you laugh. Because I laughed throughout this whole book. There were so many funny moments, and I thought that was such an important thing, because even when you're grieving, that doesn't mean necessarily that you've lost the ability to feel anything else. So I thought it was really interesting to show that dynamic and show how you can grieve and still have more to life than just your grief of losing somebody you loved. I liked Patrick fumbling his way through trying to take care of these two kids and figuring out how to make sure they were getting everything they needed, whether it be something as simple as food or something as complicated as their mom just died and they need somebody to be there for them, and their dad has gone MIA. I thought it was such an interesting dynamic. I really enjoyed getting to see Patrick with the kids, because it created so many funny moments, but again, there were also some really poignant and touching moments as well, and it was interesting to see Patrick get more and more comfortable and more attached to these kids as the story went on, because it was also interesting to see how the kids helped him deal with his own grief. Because I think it was twofold. I think that in Patrick believing he was taking care of the kids and helping them deal with their own grief, he didn't realize that they were going to help him heal from his losses and his issues. So it was just a really sweet book that had some hard-hitting moments, because again, we're dealing with the loss of a parent and a friend, and Patrick touches on losing the love of his life. So I would keep that in mind, that while there are some funny moments, there's also a lot of that in here. And if that's not something you can handle reading in your books, I would suggest you give this one a pass. But if it sounds at all interesting and the subject material doesn't bother you, I highly suggest you check it out, because it was a really enjoyable read, and it was a really easy read in the sense that, like, it flowed really well, and like the book just was easy to get through. The pages just flew by as I was reading it, and I really enjoyed it and definitely plan to read more from Stephen Rowley in the future. Next up, I read The Sea of Monsters by Riordan, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt found family for Mary Bookmiss, and family vibes for the Create Your Own Holiday Readathon, and The Titan's Curse by Riordan, which I gave 2.5 stars. Both of these were adapted by Robert Venditti. So these are the second and third books in the Percy Jackson series. And Percy Jackson is a boy who finds out he is the son of a god, and obviously he has a human parent, so he is a demigod, and in the first book ends up at Camp Half-Blood and learns about his heritage. And we're getting to follow his adventures in these two books. These are graphic novel adaptations of the original books. And I'm not planning on reading any more of these. So I believe I gave The Lightning Thief 3 stars and was just confused a lot of times about things that I thought happened differently, or things that got cut, or things that I didn't think happened in the right order. And I experienced some of that with these two. The reason that Sea of Monsters got 3.5 stars is because one of my favorite characters in the series is in Sea of Monsters, and I still liked him in Sea of Monsters. I feel like having a full-size novel, especially one I've read, loved, and know pretty well, condensed down into a graphic novel is not for me, because I'm always focused on the bits of the story that aren't there, and then the story feels rushed to me because I know so much more happens that they can't possibly fit into the graphic novel. So I don't want to dissuade you from checking them out if you're a fan of Percy Jackson and you'd like to give them a try, or you haven't read Percy Jackson but want to give them a try. I just don't think they're the type of novels for me, because I feel like I've read another graphic novel that was based on a full-length novel, but I hadn't read the full-length novel, and I believe one of my complaints was that I was confused as to what was going on and everything felt very rushed. So I'm thinking that maybe graphic novels that are based on books I've already read, or that are based on books that have a full-length novel, aren't for me, because I'm always going to feel like there are details missing and that the plot is going too fast. So I don't plan to continue on with this series, but I also don't necessarily think that my opinion should stop you from reading them if they sound interesting to you, because I think this is a me thing and not necessarily an issue with the actual books. Next up, I read Return to Roar by Jenny McLaughlin, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt 5-star prediction for Phase 10 Chooses My TBR, and anticipated for Sprintathon. So this is the second book in the Roar series, and in this series we're following twins Arthur and Rose as they travel to what they thought was the make-believe land of Roar. In the first book, they really do believe that the land of Roar is just a land that they made up when they were kids when they were playing pretend. Until one day, the villain of the land kidnaps their grandfather and drags him back to Roar, and they have no choice but to believe again and travel to the land of Roar themselves to save him. And in this book, they return to the land of Roar for another adventure. And I don't really want to say too much more about that because I don't want to give away details of the first book. I still am really enjoying this series. I love the land of Roar and getting to see Arthur and Rose explore it. And I like how Jenny McLaughlin really brings it to life. And it just reminds me a lot of playing make-believe when I was a kid, and how cool it would have been if some of the things that I pretended were real actually were real. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, no matter what their age are. The idea that this thing that they had thought wasn't real turned out to be real, and how cool that would be. But at the same time, also scary in the sense of Arthur and Rose, because they made this make-believe land have a villain, and it forces them to kind of confront some of their fears, because the whole idea was this villain knew a lot of their weaknesses. And it is interesting to see them deal with those instances in both book 1 and book 2, because it comes up again. And I think it's because a land that they made up themselves will know them better than the average person. So I really enjoy this book and the concept of going to this make-believe land that is actually real. And I believe it's a trilogy, and there's one more book in the trilogy. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this wraps up. Though I won't complain if there's more books in the series, because I do really enjoy the series. But I really enjoyed this book. I'm loving this series, and I can't wait to see what happens with Arthur and Rose and the Land of Roar next. Next up, I read Flashfire by TJ Klune, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt fire on the cover or in the title for Phase 10 Chooses My TBR. Bookception for Merry Bookmas, and Single Parent for the Create Your Own Holiday Readathon. So in this series, we're following a boy named Nick who lives in a world where people do have superpowers and he likes to write fanfic about them. In book 1, he sets out to try and get superpowers of his own with the help of his reluctant best friend / crush Seth. In this book, we're back in Nova City with Nick and Seth, and we're kind of continuing on from the events in book 1. So this book started off a little slow for me, and I think maybe it was because I was reading it at a time when I wasn't really in the mood for this particular book, but it did pick up with me, and I'm glad that I stuck with it because I ended up really enjoying it, which I'm not surprised because I enjoyed book 1, so I wasn't expecting to dislike book 2. It just took me a minute to get into, and that's why I think I just maybe wasn't in the mood for that book at that particular moment in time, hence why it took me a little bit to get into. I really enjoyed getting to see what kind of antics Nick got up to in this book because he is quite the character. I love Nick's relationship with his dad. That's where the single parent comes in because his mom died and he's only got his dad. And it is such a good aspect of this book seeing Nick's dad be there for him and be present despite the fact that he is the only one. And I just really enjoy the relationship between Nick and his dad and Nick's dad and Nick's friends. It adds such a nice layer to a book because in lots of books, parents aren't present. So I like how present Nick's dad is in this book. And honestly, in this book, we see a lot of Seth's parents, and I wish I had the book in front of me. Seth and Nick have 2 other friends, and their parents are actually featured quite a bit in this book as well. So I really enjoyed the present parents aspect of this book because I feel like in a lot of books, especially with like superheroes running around, you could totally easily just erase the parents. And I like the fact that in this book, they were there and a part of the story, and you could see how much they love their kids. So I really enjoyed that. There were some giant twists I didn't see coming in this book, and I'm very curious as to how that is going to affect the 3rd book. Again, this is another one I believe is a trilogy, and I believe it comes out in 2022. So I'm looking forward to finishing out this trilogy and seeing how Nick's story ends. And with the cliffhanger at the end of this book, man, I wanted to pick up book 3 immediately. So yeah, definitely looking forward to book 3, and we'll be continuing on with this series. Next up, I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, and I gave this book 2.5 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt Intimidates You for Sprintathon. So in this book, we're following an oceanographer named Aronnax, his assistant, and a harpooner named Ned, who are on an expedition to hunt down and destroy a monster that is threatening shipping when they are thrown overboard. From there, they end up on the Nautilus. The Nautilus is actually the monster they've been hunting and isn't a monster. It is a submarine helmed by Captain Nemo. And at the time, submarines were completely unheard of, so they're completely baffled by this machine that has the ability to run underwater. And from there, they set out on a journey aboard the Nautilus under the sea and get to see things they never imagined. So I was not a huge fan of this book. I will say it was interesting to know that Jules Verne kind of came up with this idea before submarine travel was a thing. I'm not even sure submarines existed at the time. I think the idea might have been out there, but I don't know that they actually existed and had been tested and stuff like that. So I think that aspect of it is interesting, but I just didn't really care. Basically, that's all that is. They're literally on the Nautilus, and we get to see them go around underneath the sea. They do 20,000 leagues under the sea, hence the title. So it really just is about Aronnax, his assistant, and Ned, Captain Nemo, and the crew of the Nautilus, and the journey they take during the story. And I just wasn't supremely interested. I read this because I wanted to have the background information for Daughter of the Deep by Riordan, because I had heard that Daughter of the Deep was a retelling of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And so that is the main reason I picked this up. I wasn't like super drawn to it on its own. And I will say that with the idea of reading Daughter of the Deep, I'm definitely glad I read it in the sense that it gave me a lot of background information for any future retellings I should read of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I can check another classic off of my list, but I don't know. It just wasn't for me. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it, hence 2.5 stars. I don't know that I would read more from Jules Verne in the future based on this, but it was just all right. At least the writing wasn't something that I struggled with, because sometimes with classics, I struggle with the old English style of how they were written, so at least it had that going for it, but it's not something I could ever see myself rereading or recommending, so it was just alright for me. Next up, I read Clause for Alarm by Kate Conte, and I gave this book 4.25 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt colorful cover for Phase 10 Chooses My TBR, and warm setting for the Create Your Own Holiday Adventure Readathon. This is the 5th book in the Cat Cafe series, and in this series, we're following Maddie, who owns a cat cafe on the island where she grew up with her grandfather. And in this book, Maddie meets with Jillian, the executive director of the East Coast Animal Rescue League, who would like to throw a fundraiser with a celebrity endorser and her celebrity cat to help local rescue efforts. Maddie is on board and offers her sister Val to help plan it. When Val shows up to the meeting she was supposed to have with Jillian, she finds Jillian strangled to death with one of the fancy leashes that were supposed to be part of their fundraiser. This leads to Maddie having lots of questions and trying to figure out what happened. I love this series. I love the Cat Cafe and how we get to see all these cute little animals and how much Maddie wants to try to help them. I love the relationship Maddie has with her grandfather and her sister and with her whole family, really, because there's a lot of family vibes in this series. I enjoyed getting to see Maddie try to piece together what had happened to Jillian and worrying about whether this was going to negatively affect her cat cafe or the local rescue efforts. I don't know that this was my favorite in the series, but I still really enjoyed it, and this is a series I would definitely recommend if you like cozy mysteries. Next up, I read Secrets of Winterhouse by Ben Guterson, and I gave this book 5 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt for Buzzwordathon in December because I believe it was month or season, and it has winter in there. Season was definitely part of it, and I have winter in there. Odd page number for Phase 10 Chooses My TBR, and mystery for the Create Your Own Holiday Adventure Readathon. So this is the second book in the Winterhouse series, and in that series we follow Elizabeth, who in the first book was sent to Winterhouse for the Christmas holiday by her aunt and uncle and realizes something mysterious is going on at the hotel and ends up wanting to figure out what is going on and solve the mystery. In this book, it's been a year and Elizabeth is once again traveling to Winterhouse for the Christmas holidays. Once there, she reunites with her friend Freddie and they end up finding more puzzles and mysteries to solve around the hotel, which leads them again into a deeper mystery, which they end up having to try to solve. I absolutely adore this series. I think that the puzzles and games are so much fun. In this one, we don't have word ladders. This one says Part 1, A Return to the North. And the search must start. And if you take the letters they highlighted, you have the word charm. And then at the top of Chapter 1, we have an incident on the bus, which changes to note. So it's like finding words within words, and I love the puzzle aspect of this book. Again, this is another really stunning, cool cover because you can see the little people in the windows. And if you take the dust jacket off, you can see the beautiful naked hardcover. I just think it's such a nice detail with it having a printed hardback and then the dust jacket having cutouts for the windows. I just really enjoy this mystery series with a slight fantastical element. I'm so glad that I reread it and got to reread it right after having read book 1 because the first time I read the series, there was a giant gap between book 1 and 2 and book 2 and 3. I'm hoping to get to book 3 soon so that I can complete the trilogy again. I gave all 3 of them 5 stars the first time, hoping that plays out again the second time. I just really love this series and highly recommend it. And lastly, I read A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol, and I gave this book 5 stars. This book fulfilled the prompt under 300 pages for Phase 10 Chooses My TBR, and under 300 pages for Sprintathon. So in this book, we're following Addie, who is autistic, and she starts to learn about the Salem witch trials at school, and feels there's so much more to these women's story, just like there's more to her story. So Addie tries to go about convincing the town that there's more to these women and her than meets the eye. So I love this book. I loved getting to see Addie become attached to these women and really want to speak up for them, but to struggle with how to figure out how to do it. I loved getting to know more about Addie as she is autistic, and I haven't read, I'm not even sure I've read any books with somebody who is autistic. And I will note that in my vlog, I said that she had autism because I couldn't find my copy of the book, and I couldn't remember which way they prefer. And in this book, Addie makes it very clear she doesn't like it when people say she has autism. She prefers when people say she is autistic. And I knew it was one or the other in my vlog, and I could not find the book at the time. So I took a guess, and I wanted to correct myself here in my recent reads and make sure that I mentioned that in this book, Addie makes it very clear that she wants it to be said she is autistic, not she has autism. So again, I'm still learning about this. It's not something I've experienced in my personal life. At least not to my knowledge, I haven't had much contact with people who are autistic. So I think this is a really important book to put in kids' hands because I think it gives you a better understanding of how somebody who is autistic thinks, and could potentially, for somebody who isn't autistic, could make them a little bit more understanding of somebody who is. And I think that is important. I loved getting to see Addie learn about the witch trials and really identify with these women and really grow to care about them and want to learn more about their story, because that is another thing that is important. I think when you're learning about history, I like the idea that Addie didn't want to take everything at face value and really started to want to dig into these things. And I think it's important when you're learning about history to look into things on your own a little bit, because you're not always getting the full story necessarily. And I thought that was also an important aspect of this book. I really enjoyed the way this book was told. I really connected with Addie as a character and cared about what was happening to her and what was going on in her life. And I highly recommend this book. And I will definitely be reading more from Elle McNichol in the future because, one, this book was fantastic, and two, I know that her second book is out in the UK because this was her debut, and I've heard brilliant things about that as well, so definitely plan to read more from her in the future. So these are some of the books I read between December 14th and December 20th. All of my social media, including my Discord, will be linked in the description below if you'd like to come chat with me about any of these books, or books in general. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me coffee emojis. Like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!